You've been seeing the signs, haven't you? The repeated numbers on clocks, license plates, receipts. The sudden appearance of specific animals or symbols right when you're thinking about something important. That conversation you overheard at the coffee shop that seemed to answer exactly what you were pondering in your mind moments before. These aren't random occurrences, they're not coincidences, they're the universe speaking directly to you through a language most people never learn to decode. What I'm about to reveal will fundamentally change how you experience reality. You'll discover why certain moments feel charged with meaning, why some encounters leave you with chills, and why your intuition sometimes knows things your logical mind hasn't figured out yet. This isn't wishful thinking or New Age fantasy. This is a precise understanding of how consciousness operates beyond the boundaries of ordinary perception. The man who unlocked this mystery was Neville Goddard, and his insights into synchronicity reveal something so profound about the nature of reality that it will revolutionize how you interpret every experience in your life. By the end of this exploration, you'll understand exactly how the universe communicates with you, why these communications appear exactly when they do, and most importantly, how to strengthen this dialogue until it becomes your most reliable guidance system. But before we dive into Neville's revolutionary understanding, I need to address something that might be happening to you right now as you're absorbing these words. You're probably thinking of a recent synchronicity, aren't you? Some meaningful coincidence that felt too perfect to ignore. That's not accidental. Your consciousness is already beginning to attune to the frequency we're about to explore together. Most people experience synchronicities but dismiss them as mere chance. They live their entire lives receiving constant communication from the universe while remaining completely unconscious of the conversation taking place. It's like having a phone that's constantly ringing with the most important calls you'll ever receive, but never picking up because you don't recognize the ringtone. Neville understood something that modern science is only beginning to glimpse. Reality isn't a fixed stage upon which we act out our lives. Reality is a responsive field of consciousness that mirrors our internal states, beliefs, and assumptions back to us through the experiences we encounter. Every synchronicity is consciousness showing you something about the relationship between your inner world and your outer experience. Think about the last time you experienced a powerful synchronicity. Really pause and remember it clearly. What were you thinking about in the days or hours before it happened? What emotional state were you in? What questions were you asking yourself, either consciously or unconsciously? If you examine it closely, you'll discover that the synchronicity wasn't random at all. It was a precise response to something happening in your consciousness. This is where Neville's understanding becomes revolutionary. He discovered that what we call synchronicities are actually evidence of a fundamental truth about reality. Consciousness is the only reality, and everything you experience in the physical world is consciousness pushing out, manifesting as circumstances, encounters, and events that reflect your internal state. When you're walking through life with a particular assumption about yourself or your circumstances, reality begins organizing itself to confirm that assumption. Not because reality is separate from you and responding to your thoughts, but because you and reality are one consciousness experiencing itself subjectively. The synchronicities you notice are moments when this usually invisible process becomes obvious enough for your ordinary awareness to detect. Let me give you a specific example that will make this crystal clear. Imagine you've been assuming that you're someone who attracts abundance easily and naturally. This isn't just a surface thought or a hopeful affirmation. This is a deep assumption that has become part of your identity. You move through life with the quiet confidence of someone who knows opportunities flow to them effortlessly. What begins to happen? You start noticing synchronicities related to abundance. You overhear conversations about investment opportunities just when you have money to invest. You meet someone at a random coffee shop who mentions they're looking for exactly the skills you possess. You find money on the street, receive unexpected refunds, or discover resources you had forgotten about. These aren't separate events caused by your positive thinking. These are all expressions of the same consciousness that you are, reflecting your assumption back to you through experience. But here's where most people get confused about synchronicity. They think the synchronicity is the universe sending them a message from outside themselves. They interpret meaningful coincidences as signs that some external force is guiding their lives. Neville's insight reveals something far more profound and empowering. The universe isn't talking to you. You are the universe talking to yourself. Every synchronicity is your own consciousness, in its infinite creativity, arranging circumstances to show you what you already believe to be true about yourself and your world. The external conversation is actually an internal dialogue made visible through experience. This understanding completely transforms how you work with synchronicities. Instead of waiting passively for signs from the universe, you realize that you're constantly creating the signs through the assumptions you hold and the states of consciousness you occupy. You become an active participant in the conversation rather than a hopeful observer trying to decode messages from an external source. When you truly grasp this, synchronicities begin happening with increasing frequency and precision. Not because the universe suddenly starts paying more attention to you, but because you become conscious of a process that was always happening. You start noticing the constant flow of meaningful coincidences that reflect your internal states back to you through your daily experience. This is why some people seem to live in a world of magical synchronicities, while others rarely notice anything meaningful in their circumstances. It's not that some people are more blessed or spiritually advanced. It's that some people have learned to recognize the language consciousness uses to communicate with itself through experience. The quality of synchronicities you experience directly reflects the quality of consciousness you maintain. If you move through life assuming you're unlucky, unsupported, or struggling against forces beyond your control, consciousness will reflect those assumptions back to you through experiences that confirm your beliefs. You'll encounter delays, complications, and disappointments that seem to validate your assumption that life is difficult. But if you begin to assume that life supports you, that you're guided and protected, that opportunities and resources flow to you naturally, consciousness will begin reflecting those assumptions through synchronicities that confirm your new beliefs. The same intelligence that was creating confirming experiences for your old assumptions now creates confirming experiences for your new ones. This is the secret that Neville discovered and taught throughout his life. Synchronicities aren't random gifts from a benevolent universe. They're the natural result of consciousness knowing itself through experience. When you change what you assume to be true about yourself and your life, the synchronicities you experience change to match your new assumptions. Most people approach synchronicity backwards. They wait for meaningful coincidences to happen and then try to interpret what the universe is telling them. But Neville's approach is far more powerful. You decide what you want to be true about your life. You assume it's already true, and then you watch as consciousness arranges synchronicities that confirm your assumption. This isn't about forcing synchronicities to happen through willpower or positive thinking. It's about understanding that synchronicities are always happening as natural expressions of your consciousness, and learning to consciously direct what gets expressed through your experience. When you operate from this understanding, every day becomes a conversation between you and yourself through the medium of experience. The people you meet, the opportunities that appear, the obstacles that dissolve, the resources that become available, All of these are consciousness talking to itself about what it believes to be true. The key to mastering this conversation lies in understanding something that most people never realize. Your assumptions about reality operate continuously below the threshold of your conscious awareness. You're constantly assuming things about yourself, about other people, about how life works, and about what's possible for you. These assumptions aren't just thoughts you think occasionally. They're the unconscious beliefs that form the foundation of your identity and shape how you interpret everything that happens to you. These unconscious assumptions are like invisible filters that determine which aspects of infinite possibility become your actual experience. Most people never examine these filters because they've been running automatically for so long that they feel like unchangeable facts about reality rather than changeable beliefs about what's possible. But here's where Neville's understanding becomes truly transformative. The moment you become conscious of these assumptions, you gain the power to change them. And the moment you change them, the synchronicities in your life begin shifting to reflect your new inner reality. Let me walk you through exactly how this process works in your daily life. Right now, you hold assumptions about money, relationships, health, career opportunities, and your own capabilities. These assumptions aren't neutral thoughts floating around in your mind. They're active creative forces that are constantly shaping what you notice, what you attract, and what becomes possible in your experience. If you assume that good relationships require struggle and compromise, you'll find yourself consistently encountering situations that confirm this belief. You'll meet people who seem perfect until they reveal complicated emotional baggage. You'll experience relationships that start beautifully, but inevitably develop problems that require constant effort to resolve. You'll notice stories and examples everywhere of relationships that confirm your assumption about how love works. These confirmations aren't the universe teaching you lessons about relationships. They're your own consciousness reflecting your assumption back to you through experience. The same consciousness that could just as easily create effortless, harmonious relationships is creating complicated ones because that's what you assume to be true about how relationships work. Now imagine you begin to consciously assume something different. You decide that you're the kind of person who attracts relationships that are naturally harmonious, supportive, and growth-oriented. You don't just think this occasionally as a hopeful thought. You begin to live from this assumption as if it's obviously true about who you are. What starts happening in your experience? You begin noticing different things. You encounter people who seem emotionally mature and self-aware. Conversations flow more easily. Conflicts resolve themselves quickly when they do arise. You hear stories about relationships that work beautifully with minimal drama. You meet couples who seem to bring out the best in each other effortlessly. These aren't different people and different stories than were always available to you. They're the same infinite field of possibility that was always present, but now you're tuned to a different frequency within that field. Your new assumption has changed what you notice, what you attract, and what becomes possible in your experience. This is the mechanism behind every synchronicity you've ever experienced. Your consciousness, operating through your assumptions, selects from infinite possibility the specific experiences that confirm what you believe to be true about yourself and your world. The synchronicities are consciousness showing you what you're assuming, often revealing beliefs you didn't even know you held. When you understand this process, you can begin using synchronicities as a feedback system for your consciousness. Instead of just enjoying meaningful coincidences when they happen, you can observe the patterns in your synchronicities to discover what assumptions are currently active in your consciousness. Are the synchronicities in your life confirming abundance or scarcity? Are they reflecting assumptions about being supported or being on your own? Do they suggest that opportunities come easily or that success requires struggle? The consistent themes in your meaningful coincidences reveal the unconscious assumptions that are shaping your experience. This awareness gives you incredible power because assumptions can be changed. Once you identify an assumption that's creating experiences you don't want, you can consciously choose a different assumption and begin living from that new belief until it becomes as natural and automatic as your old one was. But changing assumptions isn't what Neville called living intellectual exercise. It requires just an in the end. You must begin feeling, thinking, and acting as if your new assumption is already true. You must occupy the state of consciousness that would naturally hold this belief until it becomes your actual state rather than something you're trying to convince yourself of. This is where most people struggle with applying Neville's teachings. They try to change their assumptions through repetition and willpower, but they never actually shift into the state of consciousness that would naturally hold their desired belief. They affirm abundance while feeling scarcity. They visualize success while assuming failure is more likely. They declare they're worthy of love while feeling fundamentally unlovable. The synchronicities in your life will always reflect your actual state of consciousness, not the state you're trying to create through effort. If you're trying to convince yourself of something you don't actually believe, your synchronicities will continue reflecting your real beliefs rather than your desired ones. This is why Neville emphasized the importance of feeling. The feeling of your wish fulfilled isn't just a visualization technique. It's the actual state of consciousness that naturally holds the assumption you want to make real. When you can genuinely feel what it would be like to live from your desired assumption, you're not trying to create that state. You're actually in it. From this authentic state, synchronicities begin appearing that confirm your new assumption, not because you've manipulated the universe through spiritual techniques, but because you've shifted into a different frequency of consciousness that naturally attracts different experiences. The universe isn't separate from you responding to your requests. The universe is you, expressing whatever you assume to be true about yourself through the experiences you encounter. Every synchronicity is a conversation between different aspects of your own consciousness made visible through the circumstances of your daily life. When you realize this, you stop being a passive recipient of synchronicities and become an active creator of them. You stop waiting for signs and start generating them through the assumptions you choose to embody. You stop asking what the universe is trying to tell you and start deciding what you want your consciousness to express through your experience. This shift transforms your entire relationship with reality. Instead of feeling like you're at the mercy of external forces, you recognize that you're the creative force expressing itself through your experience. Instead of hoping for better circumstances, you understand that changing your inner assumptions automatically changes your outer circumstances. The synchronicities that seemed so mysterious before become clear communications from your own consciousness, showing you exactly what you're creating through the assumptions you hold. And once you can see this process clearly, you can direct it consciously, creating the exact kind of meaningful coincidences that confirm the reality you want to live. This brings us to something most people never consider about the nature of synchronicity itself. The timing of meaningful coincidences isn't random. These moments of recognition arrive precisely when your consciousness is ready to receive the message it's sending itself. Think about this carefully. You've probably experienced synchronicities that would have meant nothing to you a year ago, but in the moment they occurred, they carried profound significance. This reveals something extraordinary about how consciousness operates through time. Your awareness exists simultaneously across multiple dimensions of experience. Part of you knows exactly what you need to understand at any given moment. And that same part orchestrates the perfect circumstances to deliver that understanding through synchronicity. Consider how this works in your actual experience. You've been wrestling with a decision for weeks, going back and forth between options, unable to find clarity through rational analysis. Then you're walking down the street and you overhear a stranger talking about exactly the choice you're facing, describing their experience in a way that suddenly makes everything crystal clear. The timing isn't coincidental. Your consciousness arranged that encounter to occur precisely when you were ready to receive the insight. But here's where this understanding becomes even more profound. The stranger wasn't placed there by some external intelligence. That person, with their specific story and timing, emerged from the same field of consciousness that you are. Their presence in your experience at that exact moment was your consciousness expressing itself through multiple apparent individuals to deliver the clarity you were seeking. This is what Neville meant when he spoke about everyone being you pushed out. The people who appear in your experience, especially in moments of synchronicity, aren't separate beings with independent agendas. They're expressions of your own consciousness, appearing with exactly the words, actions, or energy needed to reflect back to you what you're ready to understand about yourself and your situation. When you grasp this principle, every interaction becomes potentially synchronistic. The cashier who unexpectedly brightens your day when you're feeling discouraged. The friend who calls exactly when you're thinking about them. The stranger who offers help just when you need it most. These aren't random acts of kindness from separate people. They're your consciousness expressing support, connection, and assistance through the apparent form of others. Most people miss these subtle synchronicities because they're looking for dramatic signs and obvious meanings. But consciousness speaks through whispers as much as through shouts. The gentle synchronicities that happen dozens of times each day are just as significant as the earth-shattering coincidences that stop you in your tracks. They're all part of the same conversation between you and yourself. This is why developing sensitivity to synchronicity requires what Neville called awareness of awareness. You must become conscious not just of what you're experiencing, but of the consciousness that's doing the experiencing. When you operate from this meta-awareness, you begin noticing the intricate patterns and perfect timing that govern every aspect of your experience. The person who cuts in front of you in traffic, causing you to arrive at your destination 3 minutes later than planned, which puts you in exactly the right place to meet someone important. The book that falls off the shelf in the bookstore, opening to a page that contains exactly what you needed to read. The song that comes on the radio with lyrics that seem written specifically for your current situation. These perfectly orchestrated moments reveal the extraordinary intelligence that's constantly operating through your experience. But this intelligence isn't separate from you, it is you, expressing through the infinite creativity of consciousness. Every synchronicity demonstrates that the apparent chaos of daily life is actually a precisely choreographed dance of meaning, with every step timed perfectly to serve your evolution and understanding. When you begin to recognize this orchestration, you develop what could be called synchronistic faith. This isn't blind belief in external forces, it's confidence in the intelligence of your own consciousness to provide exactly what you need exactly when you need it. You stop forcing outcomes through effort and start trusting the natural unfolding of events to reveal the perfect timing for everything in your life. This trust transforms how you navigate uncertainty. Instead of anxiety about unknown outcomes, you develop curiosity about how consciousness will arrange circumstances to serve your highest good. You stop trying to control every detail and start collaborating with the intelligence that sees the bigger picture you can't yet perceive from your current vantage point. The practical implications of this understanding are enormous. When you're facing a challenge that seems impossible to resolve through ordinary means, You can trust that consciousness is already arranging the synchronicities that will provide the solution. Your job isn't to figure out how this will happen. Your job is to maintain the assumption that it will happen and remain alert to the meaningful coincidences that will show you the way forward. This doesn't mean becoming passive and waiting for synchronicities to solve your problems. It means understanding that inspired action and meaningful coincidence work together as different aspects of the same creative process. When you're aligned with your authentic desires and assumptions, you'll feel moved to take certain actions, and those actions will lead you into synchronistic encounters that advance your goals in ways you couldn't have planned. The key is learning to distinguish between inspired action that flows from your authentic state and forced action that comes from anxiety or impatience. Inspired action feels natural and energizing even when it requires effort. Forced action feels strained and exhausting even when it seems logical. Synchronicities tend to cluster around inspired action because both emerge from the same source, your aligned consciousness expressing itself through experience. This alignment creates what you might call synchronistic momentum. One meaningful coincidence leads to another, which opens a door to a third, creating chains of perfectly timed events that unfold with an elegance that defies rational explanation. You've probably experienced this phenomenon days or weeks when everything seems to fall into place with magical precision. When every conversation leads somewhere meaningful, serves your highest good, and every encounter. These periods aren't random gifts from a benevolent universe. They're what happens when you achieve sustained alignment between your conscious desires and your unconscious assumptions. When there's no internal conflict between what you want and what you believe is possible for you. Consciousness expresses itself through your experience with remarkable coherence and power. Understanding this gives you the ability to create these periods of synchronistic flow more consistently. Instead of waiting for them to happen spontaneously, you can cultivate the internal alignment that naturally produces them. This requires honest examination of any assumptions that contradict what you consciously desire, and patient work to bring your entire consciousness into harmony with your authentic goals. The process isn't always comfortable because it often reveals beliefs you've been unconsciously holding that don't serve your highest good. You might discover that part of you believes you don't deserve the success you consciously want, or that you're unconsciously committed to struggle as a way of proving your worth. These hidden assumptions create internal conflict that disrupts the flow of synchronicity and makes your experience feel random rather than meaningful. But once you identify these conflicting beliefs, you can begin the work of transforming them. This isn't about positive thinking or affirmations, though those can be helpful tools. It's about genuinely shifting your identity to align with your desires. Becoming the kind of person who naturally experiences what you want to create in your life. As you do this work, you'll notice that synchronicities begin appearing that support your transformation. You'll encounter people who reflect your emerging identity back to you. You'll find resources that help you develop the qualities you're cultivating. You'll discover opportunities that allow you to express your authentic self more fully. These aren't rewards for your spiritual work. They're natural expressions of your expanding consciousness. This is perhaps the most beautiful aspect of Neville's understanding of synchronicity. As you grow and evolve, the universe grows and evolves with you, because you and the universe are the same consciousness experiencing itself subjectively. Your personal transformation literally transforms the world you experience, not metaphorically, but actually. The synchronicities that confirm your expanded sense of self become stepping stones to even greater expansion. Each meaningful coincidence that reflects your growth back to you strengthens your new identity and makes even more profound synchronicities possible. You enter an upward spiral of conscious evolution, where each level of growth creates the foundation for reaching the next level, This is why Neville taught that there are no limits to what consciousness can experience through the individual. Every assumption you're willing to embody becomes a reality you can live. Every identity you're willing to inhabit becomes a world you can explore. Every belief you're willing to hold becomes a truth you can demonstrate through the synchronicities that appear in your experience. The conversation between you and yourself through synchronicity never ends. It only becomes richer, more nuanced, and more magical as you develop greater awareness of how it operates. What begins as occasional meaningful coincidences evolves into a constant dialogue between your conscious and unconscious mind, mediated through the experiences that make up your daily life. This dialogue reveals that you're far more creative and intelligent than you ever imagined. The same consciousness that arranges perfect synchronicities is the consciousness you are. The intelligence that orchestrates meaningful coincidences with exquisite timing is your intelligence. The creative force that transforms assumptions into experience through synchronicity is your creative force. When this recognition fully dawns, you realize that you've never been separate from the source of magic in your life. You are that source, expressing through the assumption-confirming experiences that appear as synchronicities in your awareness. This isn't a belief system or philosophical position. This is the actual structure of how consciousness creates reality through the individual perspective that you are. Once you truly embody this understanding, something extraordinary begins to happen in your moment-to-moment experience. You start to notice that synchronicity isn't just about the big, obvious moments that make you pause and wonder. It's woven into the fabric of every single day, operating through the smallest details and most ordinary encounters. The barista who draws a heart in your coffee foam exactly when you're questioning whether you're worthy of love. The license plate that displays your birth year just as you're contemplating a major life transition. The random text from an old friend using the exact phrase you needed to hear about a situation they know nothing about. These micro-synchronicities happen constantly, but most people dismiss them as meaningless coincidences because they've never learned to recognize the language their consciousness uses to communicate with itself. When you develop this recognition, you begin to see that your entire day is actually a carefully orchestrated symphony of meaningful moments. Every person you encounter, every delay that puts you in the right place at the right time, every unexpected change of plans that leads to something better than you had originally intended. All of it is consciousness talking to itself about what it believes to be true. But here's what makes this understanding truly revolutionary. The more you recognize these communications, the more sophisticated they become. It's as if your consciousness realizes you're finally paying attention to the conversation, so it begins speaking in more complex and beautiful ways. Simple number patterns evolve into intricate sequences of events. Random encounters become elaborate scenarios that play out over days or weeks, revealing deeper truths about your assumptions and beliefs. This progression happens because consciousness is infinitely creative and loves to express itself through increasingly elegant forms. When you're unconscious of the process, it communicates through obvious synchronicities that are hard to miss. But as your awareness develops, it begins creating more subtle and artistic expressions that require greater sensitivity to perceive and interpret. You might find yourself living through what feels like chapters of a perfectly written novel, where every character who appears serves a specific purpose in your development. And every plot twist reveals something profound about the story you're telling yourself about your life. The timing becomes so precise, the connections so intricate, that you begin to understand you're not just observing a meaningful story, you're consciously participating in its creation. This is when the distinction between inner and outer reality begins to dissolve in the most practical way. You realize that the thoughts you think privately and the experiences that appear publicly are part of one seamless creative process. The person you decide to be in the privacy of your own consciousness inevitably becomes the person who shows up in your external circumstances through synchronistic confirmation. Let me illustrate how this works with something you can experiment with immediately. Choose a quality you'd like to develop more fully in yourself. Perhaps it's confidence, creativity, compassion, or courage. Instead of trying to develop this quality through effort or practice, simply begin assuming you already possess it naturally and abundantly. Don't announce this to anyone or try to prove it. Just quietly embody this assumption in your inner dialogue and self-concept. As you do this, pay attention to the synchronicities that begin appearing. You'll start noticing opportunities to express this quality in ways that feel natural and effortless. People will begin reflecting this quality back to you, either by recognizing it in you or by displaying it themselves in your presence. Resources, information, and experiences that support the development of this quality will seem to appear from nowhere. These confirmations aren't the universe rewarding your positive thinking. They're your consciousness expressing your new assumption through the experiences you encounter. The quality was always available to you because consciousness contains all possibilities. Your assumption simply selects which aspect of your infinite potential gets expressed through your daily experience. This process reveals something profound about human potential. You're not limited to the qualities and capabilities you currently express. You have access to every possible version of yourself because consciousness is unlimited in its creative capacity. The only thing that determines which version you experience is the assumptions you hold about who you are and what's possible for you. When you understand this deeply, you realize that personal transformation isn't about becoming something you're not. It's about becoming conscious of what you already are in potential, and selecting which aspects of that potential to express through your experience. Every synchronicity that confirms your growth is actually consciousness recognizing itself in a new form. This recognition transforms how you relate to challenges and obstacles in your life. Instead of seeing them as evidence that something is wrong or that you're not good enough, you begin to understand them as synchronistic communications about assumptions you'd serve your highest expression holding that dawn. The challenge isn't coming from outside to test you. It's emerging from inside to show you what you believe about yourself and your capabilities. When you encounter a situation that feels difficult or overwhelming, you can ask yourself, what assumption am I holding that would create this experience? What belief about myself or my circumstances is being reflected back to me through this situation? This inquiry transforms every challenge into a synchronistic message that reveals something valuable about your unconscious programming. Often you'll discover that the challenges appearing in your life are perfect mirrors of internal conflicts you weren't fully aware of. The relationship that triggers your abandonment fears shows you where you assume people will leave you. The financial pressure that creates anxiety reveals where you believe there isn't enough to go around. The creative block that frustrates your artistic expression reflects where you assume you don't have anything valuable to offer. These revelations aren't meant to make you feel bad about yourself. They're gifts that show you exactly which assumptions need to be transformed if you want to experience something different. Every problem in your life is actually a synchronistic communication pointing toward a specific assumption that could be changed to create a more fulfilling experience. This understanding gives you incredible power because it means you're never stuck with circumstances you don't want. Every situation, no matter how challenging, is reflecting an assumption that can be identified and transformed. The key is learning to read your circumstances as communications from your consciousness rather than as fixed realities you have to endure. When you master this skill, you develop what could be called synchronistic wisdom. You become fluent in the language consciousness uses to communicate with itself through experience. You can look at any situation in your life and understand what assumption created it, which gives you the power to create different situations by embodying different assumptions. This wisdom extends to your relationships with other people in ways that seem almost magical. You begin to understand that every person who appears in your life is reflecting something back to you about your own consciousness. The people who annoy you are showing you aspects of yourself you haven't accepted. The people who inspire you are reflecting potentials you're ready to develop. The people who support you are expressing the love and care you've learned to feel for yourself. When you see relationships from this perspective, blame and resentment become impossible because you realize that everyone is ultimately serving your evolution by reflecting your consciousness back to you in different forms. The difficult people in your life aren't there to make you suffer. They're there to show you assumptions you hold that create suffering, so you can choose different assumptions that create harmony. This doesn't mean you become passive in relationships or allow others to treat you poorly. It means you understand that changing how you relate to yourself internally will automatically change how others relate to you externally. When you truly embody self-respect, others reflect that respect back to you. When you assume you deserve to be treated with kindness, people naturally treat you with kindness. The synchronicity of relationship dynamics becomes one of the clearest ways to observe your consciousness in action. The same person who seemed difficult when you were holding certain assumptions about yourself might transform into someone supportive and pleasant when you shift your internal state. They haven't changed. Your consciousness has changed, and they're reflecting your new state back to you. This principle applies to every area of your life because consciousness doesn't operate selectively. If you change your assumptions about money, your financial circumstances change through synchronistic opportunities and resources. If you change your assumptions about health, your physical experience changes through synchronistic encounters with healing information and supportive people. If you change your assumptions about your creative abilities, synchronicities appear that allow you to express and develop your talents. The consistency of this process reveals something remarkable about the nature of reality itself. The world isn't a random collection of separate events and individuals. It's a unified field of consciousness expressing itself through infinite variations of experience, all perfectly coordinated to reflect the assumptions held by each point of awareness within the field. When you recognize this coordination, you begin to see that free will and determinism aren't opposite forces, they're complementary aspects of how consciousness operates. You have complete freedom to choose what you assume about yourself and your life. Once you make that choice, consciousness deterministically arranges experiences that confirm your assumption through synchronistic precision. This understanding resolves many philosophical questions that have puzzled humanity for centuries. You're simultaneously the author of your experience and the character living within it. You're completely responsible for what you create through your assumptions and completely supported by consciousness in expressing whatever you choose to assume. The implications of this understanding extend far beyond personal transformation. When you realize that consciousness is creating all experience through the assumptions held by individual points of awareness, you begin to understand your role in the collective human experience. The assumptions you hold don't just affect your personal life. They contribute to the collective field of consciousness that creates shared reality. This is why Neville emphasized the importance of assuming the best about others and about humanity as a whole. When you assume that people are fundamentally good, that solutions exist for every problem, that peace and prosperity are possible for everyone, you're contributing those assumptions to the collective field. Through synchronicity, these assumptions begin manifesting as experiences that confirm the highest possibilities for human life. Every individual who learns to consciously direct their assumptions becomes a beneficial influence on the whole, because consciousness is one unified field expressing through many apparent individuals. Your personal awakening to the power of assumption contributes to the awakening of consciousness itself. This brings us to perhaps the most profound aspect of Neville's teaching about synchronicity. As you develop mastery over your own assumptions and begin living from increasingly elevated states of consciousness, you become what he called a savior to others. Not through preaching or trying to change people, but simply by holding assumptions about their highest potential, until those assumptions manifest through synchronistic interactions. When you assume the best about someone consistently, they begin reflecting that assumption back to you through their behavior. When you see someone as capable, talented, and worthy of success, synchronicities begin appearing in their life that support the development of those qualities. Your assumptions about others become gifts that help them recognize and express their own highest potential. This is how consciousness evolves through relationship. Each individual who awakens to their creative power begins lifting others through the assumptions they hold about human potential. The synchronicities that confirm these elevated assumptions create a cascading effect that gradually transforms collective human experience. You don't have to wait for everyone else to understand these principles before you can benefit from them. You can begin immediately by examining your current assumptions and consciously choosing ones that serve your highest vision for yourself and others. As you do this, synchronicities will begin appearing that confirm your new assumptions and demonstrate the reality of what Neville taught. The universe isn't talking to you from outside. You are the universe talking to yourself through the experiences you create by the assumptions you hold. Every synchronicity is a love letter from consciousness to itself, celebrating its own infinite creativity and expressing its unlimited potential through the individual perspective that you are. This conversation never ends. It only becomes more beautiful, more meaningful, and more magical as you develop greater skill in consciously directing what gets expressed through your experience. The power to create any reality you can assume is already within you, waiting to be activated through your willingness to embody new beliefs about what's possible. The signs you've been seeing, the synchronicities you've been experiencing, the meaningful coincidences that brought you to this understanding, they're all expressions of your consciousness preparing itself for the next level of creative mastery. You're ready to stop being a passive observer of synchronicity and become an active creator of it. The question now isn't whether consciousness will respond to your assumptions. The question is what assumptions you're willing to embody, knowing that consciousness will faithfully express them through the synchronicities that appear in your experience. This brings us to a practical framework that will revolutionize how you work with synchronicity in your daily life. Most people wait for meaningful coincidences to happen and then try to interpret their significance after the fact. But when you understand that you're creating these communications through your assumptions, you can begin orchestrating them deliberately. The first step is what I call assumption auditing. Take inventory of what you currently believe about the major areas of your life. Not what you think you should believe, not what you hope might be true, but what you actually assume deep down about money, relationships, health, career, and your own capabilities. These unconscious beliefs are broadcasting constantly, creating the synchronistic patterns you experience. Pay attention to the themes that emerge repeatedly in your meaningful coincidences. Do they consistently reflect struggle and limitation? Or do they suggest ease and abundance? Are they telling a story of isolation and rejection, or one of connection and support? The patterns in your synchronicities reveal the patterns in your assumptions with remarkable accuracy. Once you identify assumptions that aren't serving your highest good, you can begin the process of consciously replacing them. This isn't about repeating affirmations or trying to convince yourself of something you don't believe. It's about gradually shifting your identity until the new assumption feels as natural as the old one did. The most effective way to do this is through what Neville called living in the end. Instead of trying to change your assumption through mental effort, you begin living as if the new assumption is already your reality. You think the thoughts, feel the emotions, and make the choices that would naturally arise from your desired belief about yourself. This process requires patience because identity shifts happen gradually, like a photograph slowly developing in a dark room. But as you persist in embodying your new assumption, you'll begin noticing subtle changes in the synchronicities that appear in your life. The universe starts reflecting your emerging identity back to you through increasingly supportive experiences. Let me give you a specific technique you can use to accelerate this process. Before you go to sleep each night, spend a few minutes reviewing your day from the perspective of someone who already embodies your desired assumption. If you're working on assuming you're naturally abundant, review your day as someone who expects abundance and notices it everywhere. If you're cultivating confidence, replay your interactions as someone who naturally commands respect and admiration. This nightly revision isn't just a mental exercise, you're literally rewriting the meaning of your experiences in your consciousness. Events that might have seemed to contradict your desired assumption get reinterpreted as confirmation of your emerging identity. This reinterpretation changes the energetic signature of those experiences in your memory, which influences the assumptions that create tomorrow's synchronicities. As you practice this technique consistently, you'll discover something remarkable. The line between revision and prophecy begins to blur. The reinterpretations you create in your imagination start manifesting as actual experiences in your external world. You're not changing the past, but you're changing your relationship to the past in ways that transform your future. This reveals another crucial principle about how synchronicity operates through time. Your consciousness exists outside linear time, simultaneously creating past, present, and future experiences that support whatever identity you're embodying. When you shift your assumption about who you are, synchronicities begin appearing that seem to validate your new identity retroactively. You might discover evidence of talents you didn't know you had. Old friends might contact you with opportunities that align perfectly with your emerging vision of yourself. Resources you forgot about might resurface at exactly the right moment. These aren't coincidences, they're consciousness reorganizing your entire timeline to support your new assumption about what's possible. This temporal reorganization explains why some people seem to experience sudden dramatic life changes that appear to come from nowhere. They're not actually sudden. They're the result of consciousness gradually building toward a new reality through countless small synchronicities, until a tipping point is reached where the old pattern collapses and the new one emerges fully formed. Understanding this process gives you patience during periods when your desired changes seem slow to manifest. What appears to be delay is actually careful orchestration. Consciousness is arranging all the elements needed to support your new reality, including preparing other people to play their roles in confirming your emerging identity. This preparation often involves what seem like setbacks or obstacles, but which are actually consciousness clearing away anything that doesn't align with your new assumption. Relationships that no longer serve your highest good naturally dissolve. Opportunities that would have kept you stuck in old patterns disappear. Circumstances that supported your previous identity shift to make space for circumstances that support your emerging one. These clearing periods can be uncomfortable because your logical mind doesn't understand why things seem to be moving away from what you want. But your intuition knows that something better is being prepared. The synchronicities during these times often carry messages of patience, trust, and faith in the process. As you learn to read these communications accurately, you develop what could be called synchronistic navigation. You become skilled at following the breadcrumbs that consciousness leaves for you, even when they seem to lead away from your goal initially. You trust the intelligence that sees the bigger picture you can't yet perceive. This trust is crucial because consciousness often creates the most profound synchronicities through apparent detours and unexpected paths. The job you don't get leads you to meet someone who introduces you to your actual calling. The relationship that ends creates space for the love that truly fulfills you. The failure that devastates you reveals strengths you never knew you possessed. When you understand that every experience serves your evolution, you can remain open to synchronicities even during challenging times. You begin to see obstacles as redirections rather than rejections, and delays as divine timing rather than cosmic punishment. This shift in perspective transforms how you experience uncertainty. Instead of anxiety about unknown outcomes, you develop curiosity about how consciousness will arrange circumstances to serve your highest good. You stop trying to control every detail and start collaborating with the intelligence that orchestrates synchronicity. This collaboration requires developing sensitivity to what Neville called the still small voice within. This isn't a mystical phenomenon. It's the subtle intuitive guidance that arises when you're aligned with your authentic desires and assumptions. It speaks through hunches, impulses, sudden knowings, and feelings of rightness or wrongness about potential choices. Learning to distinguish this authentic guidance from the chatter of anxiety, wishful thinking, and social conditioning is one of the most valuable skills you can develop. The still small voice never outs or demands. It whispers suggestions that feel both surprising and inevitable, novel and deeply familiar. When you learn to follow this guidance, you find yourself in the right place at the right time with remarkable consistency. You arrive at destinations just as important conversations are beginning. You meet people who have exactly what you need when you need it most. You receive information that answers questions you've been pondering. These perfectly timed encounters aren't managed by an external force. They're the natural result of consciousness expressing itself through multiple apparent individuals who are all actually facets of the same unified awareness. When you're aligned with your authentic desires, you naturally magnetize experiences that support those desires. This magnetism operates through what physicists might call resonance. Like attracts like, not because of some mystical law, but because consciousness recognizes itself. The qualities you genuinely embody in yourself are reflected back to you through the people and circumstances you encounter. This is why authentic transformation creates such dramatic changes in external circumstances. When you truly change who you are at the level of identity, everything in your environment shifts to match your new vibration. The synchronicities that confirm this shift often feel miraculous, but they're actually the natural result of consciousness maintaining coherence between your inner and outer experience. Understanding this coherence principle helps explain why forced manifestation techniques often fail. When you try to create specific outcomes without genuinely embodying the identity that would naturally attract those outcomes, you create internal conflict. Your desired results contradict your actual assumptions, creating static in the synchronistic communication system. True manifestation happens through identity alignment, not outcome manipulation. When you become the kind of person who naturally experiences what you desire, the synchronicities that deliver those experiences arise effortlessly. You're not pulling results toward you through willpower. You're allowing consciousness to express your authentic nature through your circumstances. This allowing requires releasing attachment to specific forms while maintaining commitment to desired feelings and experiences. You might want a particular job, relationship, or living situation, but consciousness might have something even better in mind that you can't see from your current perspective. When you hold your desires lightly while embodying them fully, you create space for consciousness to deliver experiences that exceed your imagination. The synchronicities that orchestrate these deliveries often involve unexpected sources, unusual timing, and creative solutions you never would have thought to pursue. This is why gratitude is such a powerful practice for enhancing synchronicity. When you appreciate the synchronicities you've already received, you acknowledge consciousness for its creativity and intelligence. This appreciation creates a positive feedback loop that encourages even more elaborate and beautiful synchronistic expressions. But gratitude must be authentic to be effective. Going through the motions of thankfulness while feeling frustrated or impatient actually sends mixed signals to consciousness. True appreciation arises naturally when you recognize the intelligence and love that orchestrates meaningful coincidences on your behalf. Now that you understand how consciousness speaks to itself through the language of synchronicity, your entire relationship with reality has shifted. You're no longer waiting for the universe to send you signs from some distant realm. You've recognized that you are the universe, creating every meaningful coincidence through the assumptions you hold about yourself and your world. The synchronicities appearing in your life right now are confirming exactly what you believe to be true. If you want different confirmations, embody different assumptions. Start living from the identity that naturally attracts what you desire, and watch as consciousness faithfully reflects this new version of you through increasingly magical coincidences. Remember, every person you meet, every opportunity that appears, every perfectly timed encounter is consciousness recognizing itself in infinite forms. You're not separate from the intelligence that orchestrates these moments. You are that intelligence expressing its unlimited creativity through your individual experience. The conversation between you and yourself through synchronicity never ends. It only becomes more beautiful as you develop greater mastery over the assumptions that create your reality. Your power to transform any circumstance lies not in hoping for external change, but in embodying internal change until consciousness has no choice but to reflect your new identity back to you.